South Africa has been grappling with electricity issues for some time. Eskom, the state utility firm, has failed over the years to maintain regular power supply, and its aging infrastructure and massive debts have crippled its ability to do so. There have been several options put forward in recent times to address the issues around electricity in the country. One option that has generated controversy is the plan to get private generation of electricity to feed the national grid. This is where Karpowership comes in. Karpowership is a subsidiary of the Turkish Karadeniz Energy Group and was selected by South Africa's Department of Mineral Resources and Energy as one of the preferred bidders of the program in March. After securing the lion's share of the bids, Karpowership stands to become one of the biggest beneficiaries. And now activists and environmentalists such as the Organization of Undoing Tax Abuse and the Green Connection are asking the National Energy Regulator why it approved the Karpowership generation licenses. Karpowership's plan would see 3 gas-to-electricity power ships anchored in the ports of Richards Bay, Saldanha Bay, and Eastern Cape. Around 1,220 megawatts of electricity should be generated between the 3 power ships, provided through floating storage and regasification power plants. Today, we'll be looking at the objections and concerns raised over the deal and what impact can this have on South Africa's economy. I'm Tolulope Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me from Cape Town, South Africa is Liz McDade. She's the strategic lead and head of operations of the Green Connection. Liz, welcome back to Business Edge. Thank you once again for joining me.
Good afternoon, and it's nice to be here.
So let's look at the Karpowership license, which is now possible because of some of the moves that South Africa is making. The country has opened up to exploring ways to electrify the country beyond Eskom. The country's 2019 Integrated Resource Plan for Electricity supports a diverse energy mix and sets out 9 policy decisions to ensure the security of South Africa's electricity supply. Now, take us through some of these vital policy decisions in the IRP that can change things for South Africa before we narrow down to the Karpowership deal.
So we had an IRP, which is it's called an Integrated Resource Plan. It's basically an electricity plan for the country. So the last one was in 2010, came out 2011, and that plan was then revised and produced again in 2019. And in the intervening decade, you can obviously imagine there's been a lot of technological changes through renewable energy advances, and what we saw was a different kind of plan. But what we all thought a few years ago was very important, which was gas as a transition fuel, is no longer regarded as a good way to go, because of climate change reasons. And over time, what we are now looking to see is, well, what else could we do? And there's storage, there's hydrogen, there's like different technologies coming to the fore. But the IRP, the electricity plan, allowed for a diverse use of resources, including 3,000 megawatts of gas. But where we are sitting now is one of the recommendations of that plan was with the need for short-term, short-term power producers to come onto the grid, because we have this problem, as you highlighted, that our central energy utility has hit a decade of basically being under state capture. The maintenance wasn't done. The fleet is getting old. It's getting itself into more and more expensive need for refurbishment, and there's a need to change. So there's a transition moving from coal, fossil fuels to renewables. So where should gas fit in, and where do Karpowerships fit in? And that was where we came into the picture. As the Green Connection is, we work on the coast, and so one of the programs that the Department of Mineral and Energy Resources came up with was this risk mitigation IPP program, which basically was to bring in power producers who could get up to speed quickly and come in and help with the short-term gap that was emerging.
Okay.
So that was where we were that's where it sort of fits.
Okay, so quickly before we get into the main controversy, the IRP has several power capacity additions. They're looking at 1,000 megawatts of coal-based generation in 2023 and 2024, 5,000 plus megawatts of solar PV capacity, 8,000 plus of wind power capacity, hydropower is there as well, gas is there as well. This is an energy mix as it is, as we said it earlier. And you said that this is a revised version from the 2010 one. We're in 2021 now. What progress has been made from the initial IRP that came out and even the revised one that was revised in 2019 before we get into the short-term controversy we're seeing now?
So this is what has been some of the controversy. Is basically what we've seen is, and now I'm just trying to remember the exact numbers, but what we've seen is that while the Minister Gwede Mantashe is pushing forward with nuclear and talking about new gas and new coal, what we've seen is the renewables have been delayed. So there's been a lot of talk about why, if it's a diverse energy plan, are we not giving equal weight to the different resources? But we are seeing some movement, and we have seen what's called a Section 34 determination, which is the admin step that goes for getting power onto the grid, the first step. And that has happened with some of the renewables, and that was where the short-term mitigation program came in.
All right, so the regulator's risk mitigation independent power producer procurement program, 7 generation licenses have been given out. They've been approved. 3 have gone directly to Karpowership alone, and the remaining 4 have gone to 4 other energy producers. Why does it seem the focus, particularly in the controversy, has been surrounding the Karpowership deal, and we're not hearing so much about the 4 other remaining energy producers? Are they not up to the capacity, not up to the level of Karpowership, or is this deal the one that really requires more scrutiny because of how it came about and also the necessary movements and arrangements that are going to be made for it?
So when the regulator gives a license, it obviously has to consider a whole range of issues. One of which, or 2 important ones, I think, for discussion today is, does it have a power purchase agreement with, for example, Eskom, our utility? The other one is, has it done an environmental authorization?
Assessments of that, yeah.
So the other, where the others might be further down the road, this is where Karpowership has suddenly found itself in the spotlight. So it doesn't have a power purchase agreement as far as we know with Eskom, but yet this is one of the requirements that NERSA should, in our view, have considered before it gave the license. NERSA, under its own act, has to look at not just current electricity consumers, but future electricity consumers. So in order to do that, it has to look at what is the impact going to be going forward into the future. The other critical issue with the Karpowerships was that they were brought in for a 20-year deal. That's what they came into the picture with. And as you would know, where we have power ships, not necessarily the Turkish ones, but wherever we have power ships, they are coming when you have a real crisis. There's an earthquake, there's a war, comes for a few years until the system gets up and going again. So why is South Africa suddenly deciding to lock itself into a 20-year deal? So these were some of the questions. The environmental authorization, now that's been a big one because that was rejected. So one of the questions is, which way is the government going? How come one arm of government is saying this is not okay from an environmental point of view, and the energy regulator is saying, well, okay, we're not going to worry ourselves with that. We're just going to give them electricity license. Now, never mind the fact that civil society and are concerned about the way that this goes. This is not good governance, but this is also sending mixed messages to Karpa itself. And I guess other investors, because if you're coming into South Africa and you want to do business, you want to produce energy, and you start your process and you find that suddenly you've got a rejection on the one side, so which means you either have to do more homework or you have to go away. And then on the other side, somebody else gives you an approval. So now, do you move forward? Do you wait? Do you go away? And so this we feel is also not a good reflection on South African governance. Also, we have to look at the regulator's behavior itself. So the regulator.
Okay, so Liz, that's the next place I want us to go into. So let's do that right after the break, because there are a number of questions as to whether or not NERSA did adequate due diligence and why it seems the agency is willing to push ahead with so many outstanding questions. So Liz, just hold on. We're looking at the controversy surrounding the Karpowership deal in South Africa, which is meant to be a short-term temporary measure to help the country increase its generating capacity. The conversation with our guest, Liz McDade, will continue right after this. Liz McDade, Strategic Lead and Head of Operations for the Green Connection in South Africa, is my guest as we look at the Karpowership deal. Now, Liz, let me just list a few of those issues as we've mentioned already. The Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment has refused to give Karpowership environmental authorization. There's an absence of a field supply agreement, absence of a field pipeline license, absence of port authorization from Transnet, a pending court case, and some other sensitive issues. As you also noted, there are questions about the country locking itself into a 20-year deal with something that's meant to be a short-term temporary measure. So why does it seem the regulator, NERSA, seems to be pushing forward? And this is where you were going before the break in terms of the actions and activities, the behavior of the regulator.
Yeah, so the regulator claims that it prides itself on transparency, integrity, and acting in the public interest. But what we've seen is a regulator that released an application for public comment where the public were unable to make meaningful comment because a lot of the information was redacted. So, and from a public interest perspective, we have to look at future electricity consumers. Now, we've seen the price of gas go through the roof in Europe over the last year, and we know that with climate change, with the climate change crisis, that one of the measures that is being brought to bear on countries is this idea of carbon border taxes. So your exports, if you are using fossil fuels, you are going to find you're facing taxes when you try and export your products. So why then would NERSA lock us into the 20-year? But also, why is it not revealing what the prices are going to be for it's negotiated with the fuel supplier? Well, not NERSA, but Karpower, and that should be something we should all know about. The port authority, so there are 3 ports, and that seem to come to light late in the day, that the port authorities had not really been involved in any of the negotiations. So the thing is that NERSA seems to be claiming that it's going to stick in its lane and just look at its own conditions and then ignore things like the environmental aspects or the fact that the ports authority doesn't sit with them. But in fact, when you look at their own rules give a whole lot of authorizations that need to be in place before you get given an electricity generation license. So we are seeing that what they're doing is not even following their own rules. They seem determined to rush ahead and give approval when none of the other things are in place. And just to say that the other issue is on the table is Parliament itself is considering an inquiry into Karpowership deal because there's been so much controversy.
So let me ask this. If the issue of the licenses was sorted, the authorization was sorted, let's say NERSA comes back now and says, okay, we're going to only lock ourselves into maybe a 7 or 10-year deal with Karpowership, and all the necessary information was fully disclosed as it should be, would you be against this deal as a temporary measure to get South Africa from the coal-fired power plants into a better energy mix in the near future, in the next 20 to 25 years? If all the questions are answered, is this a deal you could support?
Well, it's the if, because if you could then, because part of the if is the price. I want to talk about the price, the fuel, and the environmental thing. So the big if is one of the reasons that the authorization was rejected and Karpowership appealed it was because they failed to do a study or a meaningful acoustic study on the underwater noise levels, and that would have impacted on small-scale fishers in the Saldanha Harbor and other areas. So they would first have to do that study and first have to show that there would be absolutely no impact, that these livelihoods would not be impacted. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, obviously, the price that they are offering is dependent on the length of the contract. So the sort of way it was, the land-based power station would say is like, it's like they're buying a house. So it's a 20-year deal, and they're going to pay it off after 20 years, and therefore they can offer a certain price. Now what you're going to say is firstly, we're not buying a Karpowership, we're only renting it. So it's like you don't have a car, so you lease a car for 20 years, which is, again, crazy. But now, having negotiated a 20-year price, you're now going to tell them, no, but now you're only getting a 10-year deal. They obviously then going to rearrange that price, and it's not going to be going down. So the other if would be that NERSA would have to negotiate or ensure that now we are not putting an extra burden on the consumer by making the electricity price go up. And then the third issue is we are now finding, well, internationally, there's now sort of findings coming out that gas is no longer this transition fuel that we thought, which was less problematic than coal as we move from fossil to renewables. Yeah. It's now unfortunately coming out that gas is, because of the fugitive emissions, is actually turning out to be worse. So will that help us? Because we're still going to be facing the economic problems of border taxes, etc. And it's a fossil fuel, so even buying fossil fuels, as in the fuel ship that's going to be linked to the Karpowership, that fuel is likely to become more and more expensive. So there would be a lot of ifs, and basically that would mean, from our perspective, you have to start at, again, reset button, go back to the beginning. You do that, then where are we? Because these things are supposed to be online and operating by December 2022, which is already a bit late for an emergency power. But now if you reset in order to answer all those questions and you run the process again, there've already been 2 extensions. It doesn't look like
they'll make the deadline.
Yeah.
So all of this is coming about because the state utility Eskom has issues that have severely and drastically affected South Africa's economy. It's affected mines and small businesses. It's affected so many things. And research from the country's National Science Council showed that power cuts by Eskom cost the country up to 120 billion rand, about $8.3 billion in 2019. And those cuts as of then were expected to continue for the next 4 to 5 years. So that was in anticipation of having some short-term measures put in place. But if we're seeing that there are issues with the Karpowership deal, there are issues with the new projected coal-fired power plant. That's also going to face legal action if it hasn't. These short-term measures are looking like they're not going to exactly come on board in order to be short-term measures. So what then needs to be done? South Africa is facing an energy crisis, which is also affecting its economy. What are the stopgap? Where is the compromise? What is next? And while we focus on Karpowership, are you okay with the 4 other energy producers who are on board under the same arrangement under NERSA? Can they go ahead with providing electricity, and at least we know something is coming in to the national grid?
Well, I think there's your compromise, because there's also been critique around the entire program that it has resulted in, additional higher priced electricity because of the way it was rolled out, where instead of using the grid to draw, wind over here, solar over here, maybe a little bit of hydro, whatever, you've got power plants which now have to be dispatchable themselves. So that has raised the price. But if we're looking at a compromise, then maybe those 4, which are not facing all that controversy, should go ahead. We should dump the Karpowerships. And then we need to look at rolling out, which is happening now with the president's announcement, I think it was in June, that to cut some of the red tape, that those who want to bring in power up to 100 megawatts no longer have to get a license. They can simply register and go. And that should kickstart. And there's been, what has really come to the fore, I think, is people have estimated that measure itself could bring in an extra 4,000 or 5,000 megawatts over the next couple of years. So that solves our gap. And then the other thing that the Minister of Energy could do is actually just ramp up and roll out the renewable energy faster, because those are two-year building timeline. They're much faster than the bigger coal or some other plants.
All right, Liz McDade, thank you. Strategic lead and head of operations for the Green Connection. We're very interested in this because there have been 1 or 2 conversations about Nigeria's ability also to maybe look into the Karpowership situation. So a lot of people will be following this closely. The nuclear conversation is on in South Africa. The coal conversation is still on, and now the Karpowership conversation. And we'll continue to follow this as we see how it works for Africa's most industrialized economy. We look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. And we'll continue to watch this because there are a number of issues that come with it. South Africa's economy for the past decade of the power cuts under Eskom has continued to be battered. Between the mines, which are a major source of revenue for the country, and small businesses, what are the next steps that South Africa needs to take for a short, medium, and long-term solution to its electricity issues? You're watching Business Edge, and we have NC4 to watch coming up next. And NC4 to watch gives you a few stories that we're keeping our eyes on, and you probably end up seeing them sometime in our news. We start with the country we just left, and that is, of course, South Africa, where the repo purchase rates of the South African Reserve Bank will remain unchanged at a record low of 3.5%. This is a widely expected move and follows the September meeting of the Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee this week. Second on the list, the price of the international crude oil benchmark Brent rose on Thursday amid supply constraints and a drop in U.S. oil reserves. Now, Brent traded at $77.19, while the U.S. West Texas Intermediate traded at $3.19 per barrel. On the eastern parts of the continent, Kenya's earnings from exports to Uganda jumped by more than half after last April's deal. The deal cleared tax hurdles for goods such as pharmaceuticals, confectionery, juice, and spirits. Data collected by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics shows that value of exports between April and July amounted to 25.97 billion Kenyan shillings, about a 56.64% climb compared with the average value for the same period in the previous 3 years. And finally, the African Development Bank has approved a strategy to fund Zimbabwe's private sector to reinforce the country's efforts towards industrialization. The Zimbabwe Country Strategy 2021 to 2023 outlines private sector support and institutional reforms. And this brings to an end a week of the biggest business, economic, and financial stories from here on the continent, right here on News Central. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Head to our YouTube channel and, of course, subscribe. Pick up conversations of the stories happening in South Africa, in Kenya, in Uganda, and Rwanda, and Nigeria, and Ghana, everywhere across the continent where there's a business story. We are definitely there. I'm Tolilokwe Adileru Balogun. I'll see you on Monday, 11 a.m. West African time, as we talk business right here in Africa.